Hey everybody, Norm from Tested here.
Jeremy from Tested.
And we just got back from a demo for a new VR headset. It's the HP Reverb.
It's not every day we get to try a new Windows mixed reality headset because really almost all of the ones that are out there came out at the same time with the exception of the upgraded Odyssey.
That's right. And HP had a first gen, they just called it the HP Windows Mixed Reality Headset. It looked very similar to all the other ones, same lenses, same display, same controllers. And now with the second generation, they have designed their own headset, not just the ID, but also the optics and display.
It looks really different from any other Windows mixed reality solution. And it's also very, very light. It looks inspired by the Oculus Rift of all things because the new Rift S, as many people have commented, now looks like a Windows mixed reality headset.
It's so funky. The Rift S has a halo type strap, while the HP Reverb has the 3-point strap with the elastic side that's very much like the original Rift.
Of course, it has inside-out tracking, just like every other Windows mixed reality headset, and it is the same tracking solution as the previous gen Windows mixed reality headsets. The only real improvement here is the optics.
Yes, the lenses and the display. The displays are using our 2160 by 2160 LCDs with a RGB stripe subpixel arrangement.
High res.
Very high res, very clear. We both got to use it. And in fact, I got to sit down with HP's product manager in charge of VR to talk deep dive into the Reverb. Let's check it out. So I'm joined now here by John, who's the VR product manager here at HP. You guys recently announced and are showing off the HP Reverb headset. It's a Windows mixed reality headset, but this one looks a lot different than the previous generation. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, the previous generation, you saw a lot of what was based off of base unit design, so a lot of OEMs had the same exact product. This, however, is a grounds-up design by HP, so from the panels, the optics, the actual whole design, it's all been done by HP. So super excited about that. I think we got a really amazing product here.
Yeah, you're using the Windows mixed reality tracking system, their controllers, but when you're going about the process of designing a headset, how do you go about choosing the priorities, iterating? Because as consumers, we care about things like optics and panels. So, like, what's that process like? Well,
you know, we have a really big focus on commercial with our organization. We're focusing on commercial VR, and coincidentally, a lot of what they wanted is the same as what consumers want. So when we talk about training, where they're doing like OSHA or nurse training, what they really want is higher resolution so they can see details, so you can read text. For architecture, they want to be able to see how brick looks, they want to see the grain of the wood, so they want higher resolution. The other thing they all really ask for is more comfort, because if you're going to use VR a lot, you also want it to be comfortable, and today's VR is honestly not that comfy. So the two things we really focused on for this are resolution. That's why we went to 2160 by 2160 panel per eye with the RGB substripes since they're LCD. So you get really great detail. And then those LCD panels are also only 2.89 inches, so it allows us to shrink the device and make it a lot lighter for all-day comfort.
How does that design and that choice of that panel affect how you're going about the choice of your optics and design of the optics?
Absolutely. There's no use in having a really great panel without good optics. And so for this, we actually moved, on our previous gen design was a symmetrical design. It was a circle, your eye goes in the very middle, but the sweet spot wasn't very big. So what we did here is we actually lowered the field of view per eye, but once you combine them, the total field of view is up to 114 degrees. So we're being a little bit smarter about how the human eye works with our lenses this time. And by lowering the field of view per eye, it actually lets us increase the sweet spot by about 33%. So you don't have that situation where you put it on, things look fuzzy, and you kind of got to move it around to get your eye into the sweet spot. You should just sit naturally in the sweet spot because it's so big.
And that's the design of the Fresnel lens. I see the typical Fresnel rings, and they look off-center, the like concentric circles
your
that
eyes,
go toward the center.
Your eyes are more inboard, so there's more lens outside of each eye now.
And that increases, you said, the sweet spot and clarity.
Yep.
Interesting. That allows you to get away with something like a software IPD, which is what Windows has.
Yeah. So for there's two problems that can come from IPD adjustment. One is, are you in the sweet spot? With a larger sweet spot here, we feel we don't need the hardware IPD for that. The other is, does distance look right? Does dimensionality look correct? And for that, there's still a software setting that you can change to match to your IPD.
So there are two versions of this, you said. There's the consumer version and the corporate version, the same panels. What differences are there then?
So from panels to optics to the general ID, all the same. Actually, you're holding consumer, I'm holding commercial right here. The big difference you'll see is that consumer uses a machine washable face mask, so as it gets dirty over time, you can throw it in your washing machine and then tumble dry lower, hang it out to dry. But for commercial, it's a lot more multi-user environments, and so we use this PU leather here They can be easily wiped down with sanitizable wipes very quickly, so as you go from user to user, you don't pass along your germs.
When you're working with the Windows mixed reality system, are there constraints on how much you can design from the ground up that's your stuff versus how much of the Microsoft stuff you have to use?
I think the only real constraint is around tracking. Obviously, Microsoft's put a ton of time into getting this tracking right, and it's really pretty amazing. So in general, we're asked to kind of leave tracking alone and leave that to Microsoft. But for the rest of it, it's whatever you want HP, which is pretty awesome.
And then you're using the same controllers. Any thoughts on controller design, interface? Is this something you guys have thought about?
Yeah, so controllers, I mean, the big thing you want to do is you don't want to break compatibility. So now, these days, there's been a lot of work to get all of Steam VR content working with mixed reality, and today it's pretty amazing. Part of that is that the mixed reality controllers are in there in Steam VR content now, so you see the correct model. So we didn't want to break compatibility by going kind of off the train tracks there with controllers quite yet. But obviously that's something that everyone's looking at. What's the next generation of controllers look like?
Right. I'm sure everyone's thinking about that, not just you guys, Microsoft as well. And then what about availability? When are these going to be out for both corporate and
yeah, so we start shipping at the end of April, these, and that'll be worldwide availability, so wherever you're living, you're probably selling it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Totally, thank you.
So this headset's coming out soon, Jeremy, end of April.
I know, yeah, it's right around the corner. And they kind of have to do that because there's a lot of headsets coming out soon.
Right, turns out big year for VR.
Now that said, they are focusing on enterprise. They've made that very clear. This headset is enterprise first, and they're releasing a consumer edition because they know that gamers will also be interested in that higher resolution. But the fact that there is competition on the horizon, that's all very consumer-faced, I'm not sure they're as concerned about that.
Yeah. Now, the actual image quality. In the demo they put us through, they had us actually first put on a Samsung Odyssey Plus. Now, the Odyssey Plus is the bump upgrade from the original Odyssey, which already had a good OLED screen. This one, Odyssey Plus, is the same resolution as a Vive Pro, but also a filter on the lenses, so it actually looks more like a PSVR in terms of how close the pixels are
And as
together.
of today, that's the highest resolution Windows mixed reality headset on the market.
So looked good, and then we put that on, checked out the environment a bit, then put on the HP Reverb, and a little bit clearer.
I wouldn't say a little bit, I would say remarkably clear.
A lot clearer for you.
Yes, this is one of the highest resolution headsets and also pixel densities that I've seen in VR. I mean, it is really, really sharp. And we were running on a laptop.
Yeah. You're running on mobile 1080.
That's true, it was a 1080, but still laptop.
And as John talked about, the panels they're using are not only high resolution panels, but also smaller physical panels. These are 2.9-inch panels for each eye. Also square because they're 2160 by 2160, as opposed to the more rectangular 3.5-inch panels that you saw on the first generation VR headsets on the Rift and
smaller,
the Vive.
more compact panels. And also, interestingly, the optics actually have a smaller field of view per eye, but they outset them a little bit so that it's really the same perceived field of view, at least from my perspective.
Right, they
Same
say
for
it's
you?
114, but if you've used a Rift a lot, if you've used a Vive a lot, and that was 110 degrees, put this on, it basically is effectively the same. Now, the greater sweet spot, did you notice that you could see more clarity across your view field?
They were very proud of their new sweet spot. Personally, it seems very comparable to other headsets that we've tried this year, the Rift S, the Quest.
The Go.
The Go, and if anything, I felt like for me personally, and maybe this is going to vary from person to person based on their eye, the shape of their eye, but it didn't seem even as good as the Go to me, the sweet spot. My way of measuring sweet spot is I like to look at something dead center where it's always the absolute sharpest it can be, and then I'll move my head and the headset along with it, but keep my eye on that object and see how long does it take it to notice it getting blurrier, and how long, how blurry does it get. Well, on the Go, I feel like there's a millimeter or two where it's actually in focus completely. Same with the Rift S. With this headset, I feel like there's this dead center, which is really, really sharp, but then it immediately starts getting blurrier. So it's hard to say because the actual amount of sharpness in that center is better than any headset that I've tried. So as it gets away from that, it's like getting away from this kind of level of perfection, but in terms of it being a wide sweet spot where it's all in the same focus, I didn't notice that as much.
Yeah, and one of the tests I did was in the Windows mixed reality environment. You're in this like futuristic living room. You can throw things up at the wall, and on the wall I put up the Microsoft Edge browser and just pulled up like Google search results. And I was able to stand effectively in the virtual space, maybe 10 feet away from that wall, and read all the text at 100% scaling on the web browser pretty easily. Didn't have to go.
You didn't have to move your head like this to keep it in focus?
At least on left to right, I could read entire lines, and it wasn't like the text would diffuse at the end to a point where I had to move my head side to side.
I really don't think that enough can be said about the sharpness of that center sweet spot.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at textures and you see detail that you haven't seen before. It feels like it crosses a threshold of monitor resolution.
Yes, and that's not to say everything is like photorealistic, because that's different than sharpness. And they did say that on this laptop, when they're running at 1080, they were rendering it at basically 100% resolution. They weren't doing any super sampling, not like 140%,
right,
and then sampling down, which you would previously do to reduce the aliasing. And even without that kind of super sampling to reduce aliasing, everything, the edge lines look very, very smooth, like very, very sharp. And it was just very, very clear.
They said if you ran on a 1070, it was not their minimum recommended spec. The 1080 is. So if you do run that 1070, it's going to down-res it and then upscale it for the headset.
Yes, yeah.
So two additional carryovers from Windows Mixed Reality are the tracking, which is a two-camera solution, just like every previous Windows Mixed Reality headset, and the controllers themselves. Now the headset world tracking, I feel like it's adequate. It's always been adequate for Windows Mixed Reality. I mean, the great thing about WMR is ease of use. You get home, you plug it in, you don't have to plug in any sensors. It's sort of ready to go out of the box in immediate room scale. But the tracking itself just seems a little less locked into reality than, say, like the Vive or the Rift before it. And we haven't played with the S or the Quest enough, but my sense of those is that those are very locked into reality, what we've tried so far.
Right.
Windows just feels a little bit looser, a little less constrained to these, millimeter accurate movements in space. But more importantly, the controllers.
Yeah. Same controllers as the first gen, same design, same tracking, and there's a little bit of a blind spot for the two cameras when you move the controllers up close to your face.
Yes.
When you move it completely behind you. So certain applications, but if they're designing this for corporate or for LBEs,
do they care?
That's not, they don't know really
Those apps are going to be designed for this headset's field of view.
Yeah.
But that said, it's not. You don't have to move them behind you. All you have to do is really move Windows Mixed Reality controllers outside of the periphery of view, outside of the field of view, by a few inches, and it loses tracking of those. It's only for really the visible field of view. This is two cameras. The Rift S has 5. I mean, that's why they added those additional cameras, is to envelop all of this space around you. This does not have that.
No, it's very true. Windows Mixed Reality has evolved a little bit since we last covered it. Now they have a pass-through camera system, kind of like flashlight base. When you move the controller, it's a little window. It's a black and white window of the real world.
I thought that was really clever.
Yeah, and then there's also increased support for Steam VR. So if you load up your Steam games, this will work. But you are locked into that controller. You can't have the best of all worlds, right? You can't have the Oculus Touch controllers or the Knuckles controllers or even the old Vive controllers. You got to use the Windows Mixed Reality controller. And if you've used those and you're happy with it, then you might get a really great visual upgrade with something like the HP Reverb, but you're selling on, I think, on the input side.
Yeah, the killer feature of this headset is that resolution, and it is definitely noticeably better than any headset that I've tried, including even the Pimax. I mean, it is seriously sharp, and it looks great. We played in the lab a little bit. We played in Zortex. We played in some productivity tools, and as you said, text is sharp. Just everything feels more like what we've been aiming for this whole time with virtual reality. And I can see why their corporate clients would have prioritized that, because they really want to simulate things like, you're in the ER and you have to get the right tool and you want to see text in a warehouse and you want to make a one-to-one, recreation of the real world.
Or a clipboard. You want to read text on a clipboard. That's going to be important for things like training.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they're supporting both the corporate side and the consumer side, because it doesn't matter then if consumers really don't adopt this at $600 when it comes out at the end of this month. If the corporate clients do, and the LBEs do, then great. Then it's a worthwhile investment for them.
I think you're right.
And this elevates VR for everyone because now we have different type of panels and different type of lenses out in the marketplace.
As far as consumers go, Windows Mixed Reality always had two benefits. One was the inside-out tracking, the ease of setup. Now they have some competition there from Oculus. Also, it was the price. I mean, we saw Windows Mixed Reality headsets drop down to $200, maybe even like $100 for Black Friday, like seriously inexpensive headsets. That maybe wasn't even with the controllers, but low cost of entry. $600 is a lot. I'll be curious to see if we see the same reductions from $600 as we have from the other Windows Mixed Reality headsets soon after they launched, or if this really is something that is maybe less subsidized by Microsoft and HP has taken on themselves, and we'll see that price sort of maintain itself.
And I'll be curious to see what Microsoft's take is on this, if they are going to continue to support Windows Mixed Reality on not just the software and tracking side and improve that, but also on the hardware side, because presumably they could design new reference controllers that then work with all Windows Mixed Reality headsets.
That'd be cool.
Because it would just be the tracking and those IR sensors. This headset does come out at the end of this month, so hopefully we'll be getting one in to do a full review then. But until then, we do have a little more. We'll go head back to the tested office and talk about some games. But wait, there's more. A little bit of a rewind. It's recapping some of the game demos and experiences we tried at this year's Game Developers Conference. Oculus had a very high-end Rift experience that they demoed, Asgard's Wrath.
We saw the trailer for this weeks ago. It looked very intriguing. There was a lot of buzz on the internets about how this is now my most anticipated title. This looks awesome. Well, we got to play it. And it is, by Oculus's own admission, the biggest game in terms of budget and length that has ever been made in VR, as far as they know. It is supposed to be a 30 to 40 hour game. Wow. Jason Rubin says for him 50 because he's not as good as everybody else.
Okay.
It's a lot of game, and it's not just length, it's type of gameplay. Now, what I got to try was a bit of a snippet of the combat, what they call like a vertical slice, right, of this type of gameplay. But the type of gameplay that's in this game varies from hand-to-hand melee combat to exploration, lots of questing. There's a whole side of this game that we haven't gotten to play yet. But let me tell you about the combat. I was impressed. This is in the vein of Gorn or some more recent melee combat games.
Very physics-based.
Yes, hand-to-hand physical combat where it's not about like doing this. It's about very strategically keeping your weapon, your sword, your shield where it needs to be for that moment in time and then taking a shot. It's almost like they slowed the combat down in order to make it more interesting.
And it's all location-based, even though the things you're holding are just the touch controllers and a shield doesn't actually work as a shield. You're playing against virtual characters who will react to these.
And your weapons are breakable. You want to look around the world, you want to find out what weapons you have at your disposal, you want to store up the vials of health, and then you want to engage strategically. And I liked how hard it was. I failed. When I only had one shot at this game, and I was kind of surprised, because a lot of times you step into a game demo and they've got God mode on because they want you to have a good experience.
Or the AI isn't good enough and ends up a lot of people, you just like hold the sword out and waggle it and then you're getting the hit points.
And honestly, the first experience they put you into was wildly easier. Like you're in the ocean, you're like a god creature, there's a little man standing on a mast who's giving you helpful hints, but you're this huge thing in the ocean and somebody's hurling ships at you and you just have to slash at them. Fruit Ninja, right? It's like not even that exciting.
Yep.
But then they put you into this actual melee combat thing, which is totally different. And there's different elements to the combat. Like if you block, that's great. But if you parry, like if you swing at their weapon at just the right time, they'll fall back and they'll become vulnerable and you can take a couple shots. You can use your shield, but of course enough hits and it's gone. But the hardest thing to do is to react to their special moves. So they basically have super attacks, which are, from what I can tell, just a more elaborate, standard attack, but they blink. So there's this timing element to, like, they'll flash for a few seconds, and if you swing it back at just the right time, you can do extra damage to them. And that's not happening just with one guy. There's multiple bad guys all around you. And you're trying to, like, who should I defend myself from first? Where should I go so that I'm only engaging with one baddie at a time? And I found the combat immensely satisfying. I failed, and yet I feel like I wasn't cheated. You know, I feel like I know why I failed, and what I wanted to do was play again so I could do better.
This is the dream of, remember back in the day, there was like a PC game called Die by the Sword. And it was like you can use this custom PC controller to get kind of one-to-one movement. This is the dream of that because you're actually swinging.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of a lot of the like Assassin's Creed, you're sword fighting, where they're basically timing events, right? The flashing happens, an enemy comes at you, you know when to parry, and you're tapping a button, but here it's not tapping a button. Here, you're doing an action.
It felt, I mean, for me, I go back to Prince of Persia, like the old style game where it's not terribly complicated. It's just really well tuned. And this combat gave me a sense of that. And I can't wait to see how this combat evolves in the game, how my different weapons can be put to use. How can you play a more defensive game as maybe, I don't know, is there more of a magic user side of the character traits?
If you get a mechanic done right, especially if it's combat, you could do that for 30, 40 hours.
You get that 30-second loop right, and you're absolutely right.
That's 40 hours of game.
Plus, that is just the combat. You know, there's this whole side of questing. Skyrim was not made for VR. It was not clearly made for flat screen, and it was brought to VR, and a lot of people really like it. I think this is going to scratch that itch, but in a way that's made for VR. I've read reviews of people who tried the same demo, and they weren't as enamored with it. I was. I think that this is going to be one of those games that you're going to want to play. I mean, it's melee combat. If that's too intense, maybe that's a problem. But I think that they're nailing the mechanic this time around really, really well.
Very cool. Another game that was also debuted at GDC, this one on both the Rift and the Quest platform, is a puzzle game that Oculus says needs VR.
It's a game by CodeSync. We know these guys from mobile VR. They did Augmented Empire. They suspect nothing.
Sure.
This is a different league game for them. I think this is pretty cool. It's a free roaming, walking puzzle game, as you said, that involves a shadow mechanic. It's for Rift and Quest. I played it on Quest, and you'll love the fact that it's voiced by none other than Sir Patrick Stewart. Narrating the entire game, and he's doing a voice. Like he's voice acting in a character you haven't seen him do before. It's more of an elderly character. Maybe it's a little tease of what might be coming on his new TV show. Who knows?
He did the same thing in Skyrim.
But it's the shadow mechanic is cool. Like you're picking up at the very beginning of the game, you're just learning the mechanics, right? So you're wandering through this space. It's a very, it's a mobile game. It's running on the Snapdragon 835 on the Quest. So the geometry is not terribly complicated, but the art style is one that acknowledges that. And it's purpose-built for this use case. And it's a nice, beautiful environment. You walk around and you pick up some shapes. Maybe it's a sphere or a cube, and you have to place them on these pedestals and get the light just right. And then you realize it projects a shadow, and the shadow fits a drawing that's on the wall. Then you have to actually, with your hands, now that you have 6 DOF controllers on mobile, you can walk around and move these things in 3D space so that the shadow is the right size, because as you move towards the light, it gets bigger. And
a child would know this.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's right for VR, something that's based on the physics of the real world.
And we've seen games on like iOS that require you to rotate objects to create the right shadow, but actually doing it in 6 degrees of freedom,
volumetric space,
that feels very, very natural. And that's one of those things that VR now opens up, and it allows us to experience games that use this mechanic. But it gets much more complicated. You have, beyond just having 2 shapes that you have to find the right size and orientation to create the right shadow, it gets to the point a little bit later, and this is just the demo, where I encounter a mirror. And if I bring my object to the mirror, I see the object is different in the mirror. And then I realized, and this took me a moment, and this is one of those aha kind of experiences that I had from playing a game, is I could then pass it to myself in the mirror and take that object.
Oh, trippy.
Yeah, and then you bring it up to the shadow, and now you can now see it. But there's another puzzle where you can't see it, but if you look in the mirror, you can. And so you're angling over here, and you're looking over here, and it gets more and more complicated. What I loved was not just getting the shadow right, it was those puzzle elements where you have that portal-like thing where you're like, oh, I did not think to do that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I mean, the game probably is not going to be the 34-hour that we're going to see from Asgard's Wrath. This is a 3 to 4 hour game for Quest and Rift, And it's going to be good on both platforms, I think. It's going to be one of those games for the Quest that instantly does things that the Go could never do.
And also because it takes advantage of room scale, you're walking around a puzzle area. It's perfect for quests. You're untethered, you can walk around, get close to objects.
That's true.
Encourages vertical movement as you're kneeling down and looking at things. And so that's a really clever way of taking advantage of the inside-out tracking.
Absolutely, yeah. But of course, it will still support standing, snap-based rotation. It's not a you must walk around the world kind of game. And thankfully, the locomotion, the movement is smooth locomotion. I'm glad to see developers embracing that.
Very cool. I'm just glad it's not called projections, because that's the name of our show. And that does it for this week. We'll be back next week with more VR and AR coverage. We'll see you then.
Bye.